So with us today is Bryce Gill, economist at First Trust. And Bryce, you're going to have to give us a heads up if there's any territory that we can't dive into today. Feel free to claim the fifth. But I think that we're really excited to get into what's going on with the current economy with you today. We want to kind of suss out signal from the noise. One of the things that we like to do with our clients is curate, right? Help them focus on what's the most important thing for them to see and think about, and what's just a bunch of nonsense that's just a distraction. And I feel like more and more we live in a time where there's just more noise, more nonsense, more distraction, and we have to kind of keep our eyes on the prize and try to tune as much out as we possibly can.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. We all have smartphones in our pockets. We all have access to abundant technology, right? And the promise of that, I guess, theoretically was we have access to all the information in the world, and we'll all be smarter and better informed. And really, I mean, like what it seems like to me is this is just a way to pump like propaganda and dissatisfaction into the population, so we all kind of like fight each other. So, listen, I think a lot of it's noise. I'll try to do my best to clear some of it up and maybe give people a clear picture. Certainly, it's never been harder to like control your information diet and focus on the ball than it is today, I think.
Yeah, I think you guys do a great job of that. Brian Westbury is somebody that we've been following for a long time as well, and I think that sometimes we can all get distracted. And I've seen that a little bit from time to time from my favorite economists. But yeah, let's get into it. Welcome to the Compound Growth Podcast with Colin and Wheeler, where we talk all things growth, from financial growth to career growth, personal development to societal progress. We explore how each layer builds on the next, compounding over time to shape who we become. Each week, we break down complex ideas and emerging trends into clear, actionable insights. Because growth isn't just about numbers. It's about understanding the world and our place in it.
So I guess, Bryce, probably, not a ton of our viewers and readers know a lot about economists. So maybe we can just start off with how you became an economist and what your kind of day-to-day looks like and a little bit about what you're interested in.
Yeah, I mean, I have a weird story, man. I don't sometimes I'm like I don't even know how I got here, to be honest. I'm not like a lot of economists. I guess you could start by saying that, right? But listen, I guess I started out as like a kid, right? If you were just like going way back, I'd get like very obsessive. I always wanted to like know everything there is to know about whatever subject I got focused on, right? So I think there's always like this internal need for understanding and to try and figure out what makes things tick. And over time, as you kind of grow up and you go through elementary school and high school, there's all these individual subjects, right? You got like science, or you got math, or you've got history that kind of focus on one little section of the world. And so what I loved about economics, and I think the first time I ever did an economics class was maybe like senior year in high school. We had like an economics 101 class. And it was the first class that really took like all these disparate subjects, right, and combined them into one sort of discipline that tried to explain why the world worked the way that it worked, right? And there's plenty of, and maybe we'll get into it, there's plenty of, I guess, holes in the way that economics looks in the world. It's not like a perfect thing. But I think of all the disciplines, what really fascinates me about it is, it takes like math and history and psychology and statistics and everything and try to kind of combines it together to make the world understandable. Okay. And we have a more and more, I guess, complex world that's hard to understand. So it just kept sucking me in. I went to college. I got an economics degree. I graduated with that. And I was like, well, that was fun because nobody's actually an economist. I didn't even try to become one, really. I guess interned with Brian and the rest of the economics team at First Trust a couple of times, but in my head, I wasn't like, hey, I'm going to be an economist professionally. I actually moved to Atlanta after college and took a job with AT&T and was doing like enterprise business sales with AT&T for a while. And then they were sending me back to Chicago. I was like, hey, maybe I'll reach out to Brian Westbury and the rest of those guys and see if they need somebody. And at the beginning, I was just doing like data entry and dealing with compliance and proofreading documents. And, I was like completely useless. Today, I guess you just use like ChatGPT to probably do all of that,
Right.
right? I think now about like AI, I'm like, wow, there's not going to be anybody in the pipeline in a lot of these positions that we're automating. So maybe that's a big problem for tomorrow. But over time, these guys let me kind of learn on the job, and they taught me a lot. And I had amazing mentors, and all the people that work at First Trust are awesome, man. I feel really blessed to have had the opportunity. And over time, they let me start writing, and then ultimately start doing public speaking. I moved down to Texas, and I've kind of been doing it ever since. So a lot of it's just been learning on the job. I do have a formal economics degree. I went to grad school as well, but honestly, I didn't learn a ton in school. It was more learning from Brian and the rest of the team, and traveling around the country and learning from people on the ground and sort of putting it together.
So it sounds like basically, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you're kind of like me, a rabbit hole guy, where like you get obsessed with one particular thing and then you just dive in, and that's just kind of your thing for a while.
That is very accurate. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess when it comes to that sort of thing and the economy in general, I think most people and certainly a lot of our clients ask us this all the time. And it's such like a generalized question, like, is the economy good or bad? And just like, how do you approach that conversation? What is it that you're exactly looking at to determine whether or not things are good or bad at the moment? And what conditions are you kind of focused on?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, like the first thing I'd say in like absolute terms, right? America's a very wealthy place. We have problems, obviously, like everywhere else does, but big picture, like things are good in the scheme of history, right? And I'm sort of a history guy, so with that type of perspective, it's kind of hard to be really that upset, I guess I would say. But in relative terms, okay, I think things are really good if you're old and rich right now, and they're not so good if you're young and trying to like build a life for yourself in the United States. I think that's the bottom line. We've and maybe this is really since the collapse of the Soviet Union and sort of like the unipolar moment, but US policy just became about, hey, we're going to prioritize things that benefit asset holders to the
Right.
detriment of everything else. And if you've been an asset holder, it's been amazing, right? I mean, like bottom line, the asset markets in the United States have done very well over the past 30 years. That said, like, hey, if you're just graduating from college today, right? All of a sudden AI is automating all the white collar positions, or, allegedly it is, right? And we can get into maybe some of that. But I think the big picture is young people are upset because, hey, old people kind of run the entire economy, and they're very wealthy and they have a huge and growing share of consumer spending. A lot of people talk about like the K-shaped economy. I love this term, right? It's all over like CNBC and the mainstream financial press. And it's like, hey, we have all this inequality in America, and Zoran Mamdani wants to fix it, right? We're going to use socialism to fix the problem. I really don't think we have like this capital versus labor, like inequality issue in the United States. I think it's really more like young versus old, to be honest. And that's where a lot of the dissatisfaction comes from.
Yeah, that's a really good point, man. Because that's kind of something that you've touched on already in your own journey, right? We've talked a lot about this on our podcast and wrote about it and talked to our clients about it. There used to be kind of like an incubation factor to the workforce where, in my background, which is even more askew in my journey to get to where I am than yours is, but my background was in screenwriting. And in that world, there was often a writer's room where you'd have kind of like almost like an on the job training program for writers to come up and become, the next guy to have their own TV show. And that's kind of going away right now. And it's not just because of AI. It's just kind of as we, I think, as an economy have learned to find more and more productivity occasionally at the cost of labor. It feels like we've just kind of supercharged that trend. And when we talk to clients who have kids in college who are either getting ready to graduate or have recently graduated, it feels like they are entering a workforce which feels challenging to them. And I think it's hard for us to separate the facts from the feelings from time to time, but anecdotal evidence is still evidence, and that's what we kind of hear a lot of. So where do you see that in the hard numbers and the hard data? Is that something that's manifesting? Is it early innings in that space, or is this kind of something that feels like it's going to be worse than it is?
Yeah, man. Like, I guess I'll give you like a really big picture kind of answer. Okay. So, what we're sort of talking about is like the human capital that makes us valuable in the labor force, right? So, if you go back, like, I don't know, let's say 50, 60 years ago, for most people, what human capital really was is like you show up and the capital that's going to make you valuable is not, hey, I've gone to college, right? And I have like these degrees. It's the capital is like the physical plant and equipment at a factory. And so you show
Right.
up and you have to work this plant equipment. That investment's been made by your employer, right? So you come in and you have like some basic levels of skills and you need to like show up on time and all that. But the capital exists and you're sort of like plugged into it. Okay. Once globalization really ramps up and we kind of outsource a lot of the manufacturing industry, we push everybody into the service industry, right? And now services include everything from like you're a waiter at a restaurant to you're the CEO of Goldman Sachs, right? So how do you kind of compete in this service industry? Well, you need to get human capital that like differentiates you from your peers. Really simply put, you need to get a bunch of like education, right? Now the difference here is when the capital was like a physical plant and equipment, your employer paid for it, right? Today, the capital has been outsourced. You need to pay for it.
Yep.
And so go to college, take out student debt, all these things prepare people for like the knowledge work or like the high-end service industry work. And kind of what's changing now is we're automating that last thing, right? Supposedly. Again, it's like the knowledge part is being automated away with AI. And so people, I guess, are kind of looking around and saying like, hey, now what do we compete on? Really what's left at that point is like, I guess, social status and like politics and being like the most likable person or something. So I feel like that's kind of part of what this anxiety that everybody's feeling is. It's like the need to compete. It's not even just on like grades anymore. It's like the social hierarchy is going to get even more important here if I guess like, hey, the credentials and the ability to, show up with like a really impressive college degree don't matter anymore. So and that's like kind of a very abstract way to answer your question, but no, I do think like the anxiety people feel is real here for sure.
So basically what we're kind of saying is, and I agree with this, is that the idea of education becoming more homogenized, like at this stage of the game. And basically it's becoming tougher to differentiate yourself, even with all these college degrees and everything. And then at this point, how does someone actually get ahead?
Yeah. How do you differentiate yourself in this economy? Much harder to do, right? It's like personal connections. It's, I guess, again, social status. It's the ability to have like your own personal brand, right? Who's got like a social media account with 500,000 followers? There's like some kind of
Right.
implicit value to that, right? If I was a company and I'm hiring somebody, that might be more important to me now than like, I don't know, a degree from Harvard University or something. So things are sort of changing, right? And people feel like they can't ever keep up. And more of that capital that they need to invest in is being offloaded onto the individual and is no longer taken on by like society or the corporation or whatever institution is supposed to do it.
Right. So I guess if we're at a point right now where, and I agree with you on a lot of this, that there's a seemingly like this seismic shift in the way that people and, companies are operating at the moment. Like if an entire generation can't access like primary wealth building tools like assets, it's a very asset heavy economy. And if you don't own, then that's really tough to get into. Like, what are the economic consequences for when this happens in such like a concentration of wealth at the top? And seemingly a generation that can't buy in.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing I'd say is like, I understand people's frustration. I'll answer the second half of this question in a second, but it's never been easier to buy in, right? Now, we can all say like, hey, the assets they seem overvalued or like it's very difficult to buy a house, for example. But it's never been easier to buy assets. Assets have done very well. So I think it was sort of democratized access to finance. That's like maybe the positive here. It's just you have to have like the personal initiative and the discipline to sort
To
of
do it.
index into this stuff consistently. It's not very sexy, and it's going to take a decade or two for you to really see it pay off, right? What are the implications of for like the broader economy in this way? Well, like when all the wealth gets trapped at the top, okay, and this is not like the first time this has ever happened. And I think what's different, again, is it's like generational this time. It's not just like, hey, a couple big families that are sort of aristocratic control everything. It's just, it's like the older you are, the more time you've had to accumulate financial assets or houses or whatever, and they've all gone way up in value, and you're living very comfortably in retirement, more so than any retired person in history has ever really lived, right? En masse. When that happens, you know, younger people, one, don't seem to have a lot of motivation because they're like, hey, it's going to take me till I'm 40 years old to buy a house, right? So I think it pulls some of the natural energy out of the economy. I think you start seeing people fill the gaps with like debt, consumer debt, these like buy now, pay later type of companies have obviously had a huge, explosion in the past couple of years. And overall, like the economy starts growing more slowly, right? Because money gets trapped up top. Like there's only a certain amount of things people want to spend all that money on. Mostly they want to spend it on more financial assets, right? So if the CEO of a company gets $1,000 raise versus the employee gets $1,000 raise, one of those people is going to spend it on goods and services more than the other. That's kind of like the basic idea. So like velocity of money falls, real and nominal GDP growth slow down. Now, obviously, we've seen GDP actually accelerate recently. We can talk about why that is, but it's not consumer spending that's really done that. It's kind of like the massive investment boom happening in the country. So listen, you just get like a slowdown in everyday kind of business to business, person to business commerce, and you basically see the economy age and a lot of the natural energy gets pulled out of it when the natural cycle of like, hey, old people sort of pass the reins to younger people gets disrupted, and a greater and greater share of the economy is just kind of driven by retired people.
Yeah.
It's funny because we talk about like democratizing capital. I mean, that's kind of like democratizing markets is like the Robin Hood MO, right? But people we've had savings accounts, for example, in this country for a long time. And anybody could have one, but that didn't mean that they could put the same amount of money into the savings account. And just because anybody can buy an index fund doesn't mean that everybody's putting the same amount of money into an index fund. So access isn't necessarily the point. It's your experience with the access. We can get into the housing market, but to your point, we have to leverage excessively to do it. Maybe the housing, and some of this does come down to just like, we talk about the economy is one thing, but obviously it's a pocket economy. We all have different experiences. You're in Austin right now. The housing situation in Austin is significantly worse than the housing situation in the seacoast, New Hampshire.
Yep.
And I think that's, there's the experiential element that's really important. But one thing that you were just talking about that I think is really interesting was if you've kind of painted the picture of it's an age barrier, right? It's basically the haves and the have-nots. There's an age band to that to a degree. And I think that's true. I feel like it was a decade ago, we started blaming the boomers for everything. And, I don't hear as much of that. Now we've got bigger boogeymen to point the fingers at. But if we think about kind of like the journey of human capital, and you painted it as essentially it was a tangible, capital that they physically existed, and that was what brought value to the company. And then it became a little bit intangible, right? It became about whatever your degree was, whatever you learned along the way, et cetera. And now it's almost like ethereal. It's kind of like, how good at relationships are you?
Right. Yep.
Because, we talk about that, Colin and I, all the time. Like, what is the future of this business? It's a relationship business. It's a communication business. It's certainly not tangible, right? If you see the experience that these different generations have had, is there anything like this that we can, like younger generations can lean on and they can say, the boomers had to go through this, right? The silent generation had to go through this. How is it similar? Or is this kind of like uncharted territory?
I think it's more uncharted territory, right? And you guys will notice, like, I didn't even use the term baby boomers, right? Because I think it's actually a bigger picture issue than baby boomers. Like, for example, you look at it today, just like people 65 plus and their percent of consumer spending, yeah, that's the baby boomers, okay? But by 2099, okay, the share of the population 65 plus is just going to go up and up and up, right? I think there's this idea that, like, and I had this idea for a while, right, until I looked up the data. It's like the baby boomers all eventually die and then the problem's fixed, right? But that's not true. The population is going to keep aging and aging and aging.
Yeah.
And the share of consumer spending done by people 65 plus is going to continue to grow and grow and grow. Today it's 25%. By like the end of the century, it's like 40% of consumer spending is done by retired people, right? If their ratio doesn't change at all, and it's been growing. So I think it's bigger picture than just baby boomers, but we've structured the economy in a way where the longer you have time to save and invest, the more and more capital you accumulate, and then you can kind of live off that capital, right? And so in a lot of cases, you have people that are retired, they're making more money in retirement than they were when they were working. We all know people like this, right? I think when that happens, it short cycles the sort of natural sense of like, I don't want to, guys, I'm very like free market, right? But like, so I have to like kind of grapple with some of these new things that have been happening. But like, it almost like short circuits people's natural sense of like economic justice, right? That seems like a very left wing term.
Yeah.
I don't mean it in terms of like AOC. I just mean in terms of like, my intuition is when I'm in the prime working years of my life, I should probably make more money than when I'm retired. And when that's not happening, people get upset about it, right?
Yeah, and then you get pushback to the OBB, and they're like, "Hey, I shouldn't be getting this tax discount. Like, why am I getting this credit? Like, I don't need this." You're right. It's an interesting situation, and if so much of the spending, I mean, we're a consumer society, so we spend, right? That's how we generate a lot of revenue in this company or country. Sorry, same thing, I guess, these days.
Yeah.
But if so much of that is coming from that upper age band, then isn't the economy kind of living off that as well? Like, is it an issue when, you know, people in the 20s and 30s are struggling and aren't able to spend as much when the people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s are able to spend kind of as much as they want?
Yeah. So like the benefit of this, okay, is that it's made the economy very non-cyclical. And like we've all heard like calls for recession in the past few years. Like, by the way, like First Trust, we thought there was going to be one a couple of years ago and there wasn't, right? And so everybody kind of starts looking into this and we realize, oh my goodness, post-pandemic, retired people became the biggest consumer demographic. They continue to grow and grow and grow. That's why last year, the big mystery to me is not like the economy grew with tariffs, okay? I never thought tariffs were going to cause a recession personally. It's really the economy grew even though the labor market decelerated massively, right? It's because retired people don't care about the labor market when they're making consumption decisions. And so we've got like this non-cyclical, like asset holder consumer base that just spends money as long as assets do well. So the economy becomes kind of non-cyclical based on traditional indicators like the labor market. The problem here, and what kind of scares me about all of it, is like now we're just all at the behest of like the psychology of the financial markets, right? And my personal opinion, guys, okay, is that the market looks overvalued. I don't think fundamentals are really driving this market. I think a really powerful story around AI is driving the market. So if that's true and the story falls apart based on whatever reason, all of a sudden the retired people pull back on consumer spending and we're in a recession just because the market fell, right? So it is like less cyclical when we talk about like real economy and indicators, but we almost have like this tail risk now of just like the financial markets are going to drive everything. And I think it could get us in like a tough situation for sure. And naturally want like young people to be encouraged to go out and work hard and build something for themselves. At 20, it's a lot easier to envision that when, hey, I'm going to have a house by 25. If you're 20 and you're like, hey, it's going to take me till 40, but that's the median age of a first-time home buyer in the U.S. today is 40.
Right.
It's really hard to sort of envision that future and work hard for it, right? It's like very, very far in the distance.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're having to delay till 40 and you're going to pick up a 30-year mortgage that's not going to be paid off till you're well past retirement, hopefully,
Right.
then you're going to start asking yourself, what's the point?
Yes.
But on that front, like, so I was just thinking through this as you were chatting. So I've had a bunch of meetings so far year to date with retired folks, and we're getting their spending together for the year. Their spending has gone up when they retired, and they're doing more travel, they're spending more time with kids, they're gifting more, whatever it might be, buying the dream car they always wanted, whatever. But I guess my question to you is that really much of a change? Because having been in retirement planning for a long time, it's very common that people increase their spending when they do actually reach retirement. Like, is that actually that much different?
Yeah, so I'd say it's not different on like an individual basis, right? It's different now in like the mass scale that it's happened. Okay,
Yeah.
so like we can just look at the consumption share of people 65 plus. In 2012, they were the smallest consumer demographic. Today, they're the largest. It's not just because like more people are 65 plus, like their actual per capita spending has gone up. And so now what you've got is like basically retired people, doing better than they've ever done on average in retirement in human history. I don't know another time where this would be the case. Maybe we could point to like some tribe where the elders kind of controlled everything. I don't know, right? I'm not that big into anthropology, but it does seem like sort of unique to me. And I think it's short circuiting some of like the natural progression that's supposed to exist between generations in the economy, right? And I think this is reflected in the fertility rate. It's reflected in young people's anxiety about the future. It's reflected in a lot of different places. So it's really at the mass scale that it's happened on. And by the way, like maybe this shouldn't matter that much, except for hey, the entire government, as it's currently structured in the United States, like federal government, exists to basically send resources from young people to old people, right? So we got
What
like
do you what do you mean by that? Can you unpack that?
yeah, so like Social Security, Medicare together are probably 50% almost of the federal government's budget, right? The two biggest single components. Then you add interest on the debt. Okay, interest on the debt's like $1 trillion a year, something like probably 15% of federal spending, I would guess. So you add those three things together, you're at like 65, 70% of all the money that the federal government spends in an average year is basically payments to retired people, right? They get Social Security, they get Medicare, and then interest. Maybe I'm a little bit more playing fast and loose with that, but most of the people that own treasuries are older individuals. Again, like the idea behind Social Security was like, hey, people retire, they don't have an income, they're relying on family or they're relying on whoever to take care of them. Let's institute something in society to support retired people. Well, it's eaten in the entire budget, and now it's just going to the wealthiest demographic in the country from the less wealthy demographics. So it's become like, this is what drives the debt and all the other problems at the federal level.
Yeah, I think you're right, but it's kind of supporting two demographics. It's not just the older Americans, but it's also the wealthiest Americans, right? Because they're also more likely to own the treasuries. So they're the ones that are receiving the bulk of that interest. The people who have money are the ones who are receiving the bulk of the interest. And then, what's tough is because, again, going back to, I don't know what the right thing to call this economy is when it comes to like, senior citizens who are relying on Social Security, because some of them are and some of them aren't.
Yes.
But like there has to be, in my mind, some solution that differentiates between the two. Because social systems exist for a reason, but that reason doesn't exist for everybody. So
Yes.
that can be, I think, tough for us to navigate.
No, I think the easy way to do that, right, is you means test benefits at the top. I think it's a pretty, we'll have to fight about it, obviously, but like it's not easy, but it's simple, right? Like the solution to it.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of resistance against that, obviously, because people want to receive their Social Security benefits. I get that. But when you look at like when legislators will talk about this, or there'll be debates in like the policy space about means testing Social Security, what they always talk about is, hey, we don't want to touch this because right now it's a universal program and there's a universal buy-in, right? I think there's a fear that you means test this, all of a sudden you lose support for the program at like the highest levels of society, and you start seeing like them go after and like kind of trying to disassemble the safety net that exists for everybody, right? So listen, we need to find a way to avoid that happening, right? But
Yeah.
I don't see any other way around it at this point. Something needs to be done. We can't just send all the federal budget to like the richest, most well-off people in the country, right? It doesn't make
Right.
sense.
And you can't just like expect altruism to save the day either, right? It's, there are certainly people that feel like they paid into it, so they should get it back. They think of Social Security as a savings account or like a payback system. And it is to a degree, but it is supposed to be spread out, right? It's not supposed to be concentrated. Just to push back though on the idea that you were kind of referencing the economy as almost like a vibe economy. Like if we're essentially driven by market mentality and animal spirits, which I see that so much these days. We talked a lot about the rise of the retail investor and how much they can actually directionally impact the market these days. And algos will respond to like a trending article about AI doomerism and
Right,
send the markets
exactly. Yeah.
down. Right. So there are all these factors that are not like just, hey, let's look at the data, which makes it tough. But at the same time, there's an army of financial advisors out there that are coaching their clients not to panic when the markets don't support their ideas. And, if you have people like Colin and myself working with the older clients that have either a bucket approach to, spending retirement or just like somebody they can call without hitting the panic button, is there a reactionary element to that where they'll see the markets go down and they'll be like, oh my gosh, I got to sell, or will that not happen? Who is actually going to be selling if we see a prolonged, 30% decline? That's not just like eight months.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great point. I think, listen, financial advice has never probably been more ubiquitous than it is today, right? And they do have access to someone talking them off the cliff. That's never existed in such a widespread sense before. Ks have never been as big as they've been before, right? Every 2 weeks, okay, the market's down 40%. I'm still putting money into my 401k, right?
Yeah.
So there's all these stabilizing factors that exist around the market. I think for me, though, I look at it and say, hey, market goes down because of AI. Okay, my brokerage account's down 30% or something. I don't know. We're just spitballing numbers, right? I probably look at that and say, hey, maybe I should take one less vacation this year, or maybe I'll delay remodeling my kitchen. And at the same time, the large AI companies probably pull back on capex at the same time. That's enough to probably give us a recession in the United States by itself. I don't want to overstate it, right? It's not going to be 08, 09. Though when you look at like some of these private credit funds, right, it kind of already does look like 08, 09.
Oh God,
But
yeah.
like Blue Owl is down like 65% or something.
Yeah.
And we can maybe talk about that in a second. But big picture, that's like where I see the risks here. Like the United States economy is very stable. Consumer spending is very top heavy, right? Top 10% of income earners do like 50% of consumer spending. Retired people do 25% of consumer spending. These are all stabilizing factors. So it's positive in that sense, but it does make like the wealth effect more of something to contend with. And we've only really heard about the wealth effect in a positive sense. The Fed would always be like, we're cutting rates because the wealth effect boosts consumer spending by some percentage point amount, right? Today, I think the negative wealth effect is something we actually have to contend with in, probably a way we never have before.
So on that front, Bryce, and you brought up two things that I feel like we could have a whole episode about, which is private credit and then also AI. But I've been keen to dive into the AI because we've been kind of dancing around it a little bit. We've seen a ton of articles lately about, potential smoke with OpenAI, overspending, obviously the build out of huge infrastructure and the spending that's going on there. What's your take on AI at the moment? And is this, I don't want to say a bubble because that's a word that's thrown around a lot, but is the hype
So you just
justified in
did.
the current market? I just threw it out anyway, but is the hype kind of justified in the market? And do you think there's fire behind the smoke?
I mean, my personal opinion is I don't think this justifies, like, if you look at the fundamentals, I think this looks very frothy, and I think it looks like a really powerful story with not a lot behind it. The capital spending is like great in the sense that it boosts the economy and it creates jobs, and like, whatever, something bad happens with AI, all the data centers still exist. We can use them for something else, right? But it seems to me like I don't know how they're going to monetize all this stuff. When I look really at like the market that's being created for AI here, what have we seen really in the past like couple of weeks? The stocks that are getting hit the hardest by this are like existing software companies, basically. I think basically what we're going to see happen here is AI is going to cannibalize other parts of the software market. A similar thing happened with like the coders, right? All of a sudden, hey, I can do 4 times as much coding with half the people. The Silicon Valley guys see this, they're like, this is incredible. This is the best piece of technology that's ever existed. And it's going to do this in the rest of the economy. I think they're just extrapolating there. I think it's much harder to automate other areas of the service sector than it is to automate like coding, right? It's obviously AI would be good at writing computer language. It's a computer. Of course, it's going to be good at that, right? Obviously, it's going to be really good at creating better software faster. But can it really automate away like a third of jobs and like, automate a huge chunk of the service sector in the United States? I'm much more skeptical about that. I think it's going to be really difficult to achieve that. And you look at the amount of money they're all spending, I think their idea here is like, hey, I have to spend because the other guy is spending, and I'm, if I don't spend, like I'm going to get left behind, right? And part of this too is downstream of like, there's a national AI race in competition with China, who's also going for AI, right? So, but these individual companies, I think their idea is like there's going to be a winner take all sort of AI platform here, and whoever wins is the top dog. The problem is like the reason we love tech, at least I thought, okay, is that it's asset light, it has massive revenue per employee, and there's no marginal cost to produce. Right? It's like a dream business because of that. AI is changing all of that, right? It's not asset light anymore. I mean, it's still high marginal revenue revenue per employee, obviously, but there's huge marginal cost to produce. I got to spend $200 billion on a data center so I can offer the exact same thing with basically like the Google AI thing at the top of the search results, which I don't even use, right? So I see them taking on a lot of balance sheet risk. I don't really see the service that they're offering getting much better. And like, if really like AI for most people is a chat bot, we have a massive capital investment to offer like a commoditized chat bot to everybody. That's like the airlines as a business. That's not like this revolutionary new like business model that's automating everything away. So I'm kind of more skeptical here. I think it's great for the economy short term, but and we'll use the data centers for something, right? But I worry about them being able to monetize all this. OpenAI is the obvious,
Sure.
worst case one, because it's not like Microsoft doesn't have a core business to fund all of this with.
Right, but it's looking like the MySpace of AI right
It
now.
is
Like,
very much so.
It feels like it's the old name, and the first move advantage seems like it's gone right now for
I think that's
OpenAI.
totally right. That's the problem with software, right? Is like, hey, I can very quickly create a better software than you have. And that's what's happening to all these other companies. They're all getting disrupted by like AI potentially could write software better than this.
Potentially, though, right? I think the thing is that people are really focused on what could happen in a like excitement or enthusiasm, to your point, for AI, without recognizing that these are enterprise services that are not easily replaced. You're not replacing open heart surgery on your CRM because you can create your own Claude CRM. Like, that's not what is going to happen. And at least it can't happen quickly. And in the time that it takes to happen, I feel like these software services will just get better at providing service.
Well,
So
yeah. And then it's like on top of that, we always talk about this too. Wheeler and I go back and forth on this. It's like you have so much hype around this, and it feels like so many people just forgot about fundamentals. And eventually you need to make money off of this. Like you can't just
right.
unlimitedly spend to build out this system if there's no capital generation behind it. And then from a business perspective, yes, we use AI in our business and it has streamlined a lot of our processes. But with that being said, it hasn't necessarily saved us a ton of time because we're having to interact with the AI all the time to generate a product. I think the output is probably better because of it, but that doesn't mean that going from working an 8 hour day is now going to working a 2 hour day because all the rest of the stuff is taken care of.
Yeah, we're actually just hiring people to do more and better work with AI.
Yeah.
It's doing the opposite of what we were concerned with. And you brought up froth. I think when people were talking about the bubble that Colin wasn't going to mention last year, they were really focusing on the hyperscalers, right? Or, just the AI specific companies, or even some of the software companies that were just like talking about AI all the time. And now the froth has come out of a lot of that area. I mean, you look at Microsoft is like negative over the last year and a half or 2 years or 3 years, depending on when this episode airs. And now you see the froth move into, the quote unquote halo assets or the intangible or the more tangible assets, right? And you see like the PEs for John Deere and Caterpillar scale up, or you see, Costco and Walmart inflate. And you see kind of like these vacuums, in gold and silver, kind of vacuuming out the risk appetite. And it feels like if this is that bubble that shall not be named, it feels like maybe it's just different than what people expected it to be. And it could be like what we see in 2022, where it was kind of like a rolling recession that didn't quite exist. It wasn't actually a recession, but you saw, the layoffs hit different sectors. You saw the decline in asset value in different sectors. And maybe the software has just been hit first, but I don't know if I don't see froth in software. I don't, see froth in the NASDAQ really right now.
Yeah, I think, maybe like the optimistic view here is we're having this big rotation. Like the kind of market fundamentals are improving here. There's no question about that. And maybe like the AI bubble was again in like the private credit space or something. They're all investing
Yeah.
so heavily in these data centers. And like the beautiful thing about private credit is like 0809, right? Like we had banks obviously lend for these mortgages that were subprime and people couldn't pay them off. And there was all this fraud and all this stuff. And then the whole banking system kind of collapses. We've basically taken all the risk out of the banking system. They're not really making like risky business loans, right? They're making mortgages, they buy treasuries and then do a little consumer lending on the side. We basically just outsourced all the risk to private investors.
Credit, yeah.
So like, hey, people are down 60% because they invested in private credit, but like the rest of the economy is pretty much fine. Maybe that's where all the AI froth happened for the most part. And we've already seen it all wash out, right? Like that's the most optimistic I could kind of be about it. I do think that's the benefit of private credit, right? Is like let private investors that can afford it take the risk.
I can't tell you the amount of people that have come into our office over the last 2 to 3 months to pitch a private credit fund.
Or
It
2 to
is,
3 years even. Like
yeah, it's nuts. I mean, it just seems like everybody right now is so hot on private credit. It's alarming, and like this isn't strictly related, but it just seems like it's just a business that's so propped up on some of these things that it just scares me a little bit. But to your point, like it seems like offloading all the risk into one particular sector. And if that one blows up, it does affect a very limited amount of people, which is, to your point, a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's been the big trend in finance over the past few years is like the 60-40 wasn't really working because of treasury volatility or whatever. And so like, hey, let's get you access to this new bucket of assets, alts, and that includes private credit and includes private equity and all that. We're going to like democratize the private markets, right?
democratize alts.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we're democratizing again, right? And I like kind of like the idea in theory, first of all, I'll say that. But the problem here is scaling it, right? Like And I don't know how it is with you guys in your area of the country, but like the amount of money private equity is paying for like small businesses and, like, why is my barber shop being bought by private equity? That doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, right? So hoover up anything they can and repackage it and like push it out the door. And I think like they're gonna have a ton of problems scaling this. Like maybe they'll eventually be able to figure it out, but I think we're just trying to grow maybe this asset class too fast in the industry. That's like sort of my working theory on it. And like the data centers are all tied up in this, and there's a lot of things going on. But I think that there's problems with scale here for sure.
Yeah. So how do we move forward? Right? Like I think it's what's fun about economics is you get to explain what happened after. And that's the easy part or the kind of like understanding element to it. I feel like there's like a daily, be here now prescription that people could follow where they just try to figure out what matters and what doesn't. I think it's like if we all know that it's impossible to predict the future, and we have the best ideas of how we think things are going to go, and we're frequently wrong, and that's why we just try to stay flexible, right, and keep our options open. But how do we think about like focusing on what matters and what's noise? What are the indicators you watch? What do you rely on for your information diet to shape your thinking?
Yeah, so people ask me this all the time. I wish I had like a better answer. I sit on planes all the time, right? I'm traveling constantly for this job, and I just try to read as many books as I can. I think books are by far the best way to kind of get information. If you're interested in a subject, like you should just buy a book on it, and preferably it should be a book that was written 5 years ago or more, because if it's a book about a current topic that just came out, there's going to be all this political narrative that's injected in there. Read like a long form kind of exposition of what you're interested in. I think that's number one. Number two is I'm lucky, guys, because I'm an economist. I've been trained to look at like actual government data, right? And understand these indicators a little bit better. So those are the two things I think that make up most of my information diet. Honestly, I try to avoid the news as much as I can. I think there's important things in the news, obviously, but 90% of it is just like rage bait almost. So I don't think it helps you. There's this book I read years ago called Stop Reading the News. It's by like a Danish psychologist. It's like 70 pages long. I think everybody should read it. And it talks about just like, hey, modern news diet is just making you anxious and stupider. And here's all like the scientific reasons why. And this was like basically written before social media really existed, right? So you can understand how much worse it would have gotten since then. Yeah, it's about honestly controlling the amount of information you take in, and I'm still not even good at that, right? We're just constantly on phones and everything else. So
Yeah.
long form, maybe if you can read some actual government data that comes out. I know most people aren't probably going to do that, but just read books. Books are the best thing to do.
I'm in the process of, I don't know if you're a Tim Ferriss fan, but I was rereading the 4 Hour Work Week, and I came to a little excerpt last night that was talking about him with the news. And he was literally saying the exact same thing, which is the moment I stopped watching the news, I started making better decisions. And he was just kind of talking about thinking things through versus reacting to things, informing your own opinions, and having the time to sit down and think was one of the biggest benefits that he had to streamline his life. And to your point, I think you're being pushed a lot of stuff for a reason, and it's probably trying to influence you one way or another. And I think probably the best thing about being an economist is having the ability to kind of make your own decisions and directions and trying not to be influenced by other people.
Yeah. You know, it's funny because I feel like even just, stop reading the news, stop paying attention to the news is kind of that's a difficult ask, right? I think it's maybe limiting how much of it you consume to a degree or just trying to stay focused to the facts. I was thinking about this because of the USA men's hockey team winning the gold this year. And the last time that happened was Lake Placid, 1980. The country was working its way out of stagflation. Like economically, we were not in a good place. And people latched on to that story, especially, beating the USSR. Wasn't even the gold medal game. We always like focus on that. But when they beat Russia, it was semifinal game. But that was like celebrated like enormously, and it was a great game, and it was a great moment for the country. We have like a similar struggle right now. It's not stagflation by any means, but it's a there's economic uncertainty. We had a amazing gold medal game that people were really behind until like social media started like making it political. And I'm just trying to point out the difference between those two experiences, because there was no opportunity for that pushback, for that fallout following the 1980 game. And I wonder how things would have been interpreted differently if there was. And is it just like this impossible accent to, like, there's so much content at our fingertips all the time. If I just had a phone without all the internet, I would probably have a more peaceful life right now.
Totally. I totally agree. And I think like, maybe that story you just kind of told about winning gold in hockey, I think it's reflective of, like a loss of national identity, or like an ability to sort of all kind of appreciate something together. Like we're running out of these like unifying almost rituals, or like events. Even like you have the Super Bowl, right? And like it's really just a controversy because it's in Spanish, right? So
right.
I think there needs to be like a concerted effort in the United States to have like consistent kind of events that we all appreciate together. And I don't know if it's like, hey, the powers that be are, let's push a political narrative into this and make them all fight each other, or if it's just like we've basically turned information into the Wild West. It's not just Walter Cronkite anymore, given like the one line that everybody agrees with. It's like you got people from all different like walks of life saying their piece on it. But I hope Americans become more and more kind of cognizant that we need these like unifying events and like topics and things to kind of hold us all together culturally, because we're obviously not bound together by like religion or race or whatever anymore, right? So we need something else to kind of unify everything together. I think we need to be more intentional about this stuff, and there needs to be like a certain amount of this needs to be kind of sacred in like a secular sense, because we got like almost 400 million people in this country, right? And we're not all going to agree on values. So we got to at least agree on men winning gold at the Olympics is good. I feel like that should be pretty.
Yeah. Just as women winning gold is good, right? Like winning gold is good.
Gold is good. So Bryce, on that front, we're coming up to an hour here, and we appreciate your time. It was awesome having you on. We usually ask a closing question to most of our guests. Our question for you, given everything that we talked about today, is what's the one thing that you wish more people understood about the way the economy works?
That's a good question. I guess I would say, listen, there's a lot of intangible things about the economy that like we can't really measure, right? That's the problem here. Is like I mentioned at the beginning, economics has limits, right? And we're all focused on like, hey, what can we measure with like empirical data? I think the things that we measure right now are pretty good. Like we're materially very wealthy in the United States. It's the things that we can't measure very well that have sort of been neglected, right? Like community, young people being able to buy homes, people having an investment in the consistent culture in the nation. Like all these sort of like intangible things just became less and less, I guess, important societally because they're hard to measure. We need to do a little bit better job like trying to measure these things and investing in them. I think in the US, if we want to continue to be a thing over here, there's so much talk about geopolitics. There's so much talk about Russia, Ukraine, Israel, like Iran, all this stuff. Honestly, like the biggest problem the United States has is just like internal division. So I hope, again, we can find some ways to just find common ground with each other. And I think we can. I travel all over this country. I talk to people in every state. Like it's the digital world that divides us, in my opinion. When I meet Americans all over the country, like everybody's pretty cool and I get along well with pretty much everybody. So I think a lot of this is just like a fever dream from like integrating technology in our lives and not knowing how to deal with it yet.
We agree. I mean, we always talk about, when we talked about this at the very beginning, being pulled down rabbit holes. And oftentimes you can get pulled down to rabbit holes that take you to places that aren't necessarily the happiest, whether you're looking at politics, something economic related, or whatever it might be. And I think that's definitely a fair point that building the community back up and having that camaraderie as a country is certainly something that I think we should all be striving for.
Yeah, it's the intangible thing that's like more powerful than anything else, right? It's what really made the United States into a superpower at the end of the day. So I think it's something pretty valuable to get back.
For sure.
I like the message of unity, Bryce. So thank you very much, Bryce Gill, everybody. Bryce, where's the best way for people to read and hear what you have to say? Where should they find you? Are you on LinkedIn? Where do we get more Bryce Gill?
I mean, the first thing you do is just Google First Trust Subscribe. We write all these pieces on the economy. Everything's one page or less, easy to read, easy to share. It's all free. I'm never going to send you a 10-page paper on the yield curve. If you're interested in this stuff, I think that's a good resource, right? I also have a LinkedIn I post everything on. So that's a great place to find this stuff if you don't want it in your inbox.
Sweet.
Perfect. Awesome, Bryce. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. It was a great conversation. We'll have to have you back on again and enjoy the warm weather out in Austin.
Absolutely, guys.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Yep.
Thanks.
The information in this material is for general information only and is not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. Investment advice offered through Integrated Partners, doing business as Ko-Fi Advisors LLC, a registered investment advisor. Integrated Partners does not provide legal, tax, mortgage advice or services. Please consult your legal tax advisor regarding your specific situation. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. All investing involves risk, including loss of principal. No strategy assures success or protects against loss. The economic forecasts set forth in this material may not develop as predicted, and there can be no guarantee that the strategies promoted will be successful.
Compound Growth with Wheeler and Colin. Sponsored by Ko-Fi Advisors. Reach out today. Yay!